My name is Jamie Hickey, and my position is with the Division of Continuing Studies here at UW-Madison, but I also teach for the School of Music. I teach Music 151, which is the basic concepts of music course. It's for non-music majors who are interested in music theory. So I always tell people it's the math class of music. So it's how music is put together, and so I end up with a lot of people in the STEM fields who end up taking the class. I have a lot of people who are in chemistry and computer programming and engineering in the class, and we have a lot of fun looking at how music is put together. One of my learning objectives for the course as a whole is to send students out with enough material about music that they can use it for a lifelong interest in the subject. When most people teach a music course like this, they basically teach what I cover in the first 5 weeks of the semester, which is the equivalent of teaching people the letters of the alphabet and then how to spell words, but it doesn't go far enough to tell you how to put those words together to actually make a sentence, which means that from a music equivalent, they're teaching you how to read the notes and then some very basics of what to do with the notes, but not how to actually combine those into real music. So my goal is to give them enough of a package that when they go out into the real world after they graduate, especially since for a lot of these students it's the only music course they take while they're here on campus, that they actually have enough background and knowledge that they can use what they learn in the class for the rest of their life with their interest in music. So that's my big goal for the class, which means we cover music theory comparable to what most liberal arts colleges would do in a year of a music theory course curriculum, but we do that in a semester. But then I also want them to understand how all of this fits together into music, because music wasn't just invented all at one time. It evolved over time from a combination of composers and performers. So I do this whirlwind trip through music history, very quick trip through music history. And then I wanted a way for students to share information about music history, but I also wanted a way for students to see that evolutionary process and be able to explore that on their own. The first thing I tried was discussion postings. I thought that would be a nice way to get students engaged. They could do some research, look for some interesting facts about different composers, and then publish those, and then everyone would read those discussion postings and find out all sorts of interesting things about the composers. Thought that was a great idea. Well, it was a terrible idea. And in fact, it was probably the least effective assignment I've ever designed in my entire teaching career. Basically what happened is the students would put in very boring facts about when a composer was born or when they died or how many symphonies they wrote. And there were 70 students in the class. There were 5 periods of music history, which meant 350 some discussion postings, and the only person reading them was me. All right? So basically, didn't work. Also, it didn't work from a standpoint of trying to assess that, because there's no way to assess 300 some different discussion postings and expect them to be able to do anything with that on the exam. So that didn't work at all. So as I was going through semesters, I tried different things. I tried different ways to try and get the students to be more engaged in the discussion postings. And I ended up coming up with a solution totally by accident. As I walked through our kitchen, I saw our daughter we have a computer in our kitchen, and I saw her on her Facebook page on the kitchen computer. And as I looked at that, I thought, you know what, here's something we could do instead. We could actually set up quasi-Facebook pages for the composers and then have them interact with each other via those Facebook pages. Right? So what we came up with was, there's 2 sites, one for each class. One is called Mad Composers and one is called Social Tactus. And we originally developed it in Ning.com, was the original software that we used to make that happen. We now use WordPress for this, and it's been working very well. But we started with Ning, and part of the interesting thing about this, and actually the thing that motivates students about this particular project, is that Facebook has a policy that you cannot impersonate dead people on the internet. And so it's been amazingly motivating to students to tell them, you know, you're really not supposed to be impersonating dead people on the internet. It puts that much more spin into their interest in the assignment by telling them that they're actually doing something that technically there's some places that have a policy that you're not supposed to do that. So that's also part of why we're in WordPress, is because there are sites that have policy statements that say you're not supposed to impersonate dead people. And of course, when we're doing this particular project, the students are impersonating on the internet. Right? So all these composers do not exist. Okay? So basically, what we set up is this site, which you can't see, because I'll have to leave the computer up here. Right? This is the social tactus site for the online class in WordPress. And basically how this works is the students do a combination of research. First thing they do is research. Second thing they do is writing. And then the third thing they do is then they explore what everyone else has done. So it combines all three of those, which is a really nice aspect of this project as well. The students do this in groups. So in groups, usually of 4 students, 4 or 5, they become a composer. So you can see all the composers across the front of Baskin Hall there. Those are all the composers they become on the site. And they become that composer as a group. They do the research. They share what they find together. And then there are 2 components to the site. One component is an individual paragraph, which the students then write based on, for example, one paragraph is socioeconomic issues at the time. One paragraph will be talk about that composer's body of work. What did they do? The paragraph will be talk about the composer's favorite piece and why it was their favorite. They have to write as the composer, so everyone has to write in first person, and they have to also assimilate the style of that particular composer. So they need to know enough about the composer, be able to take on their personality as well as what they would have done as a composer during that time. So all of those are combined together. Here's the opening page of the site. You can see over here on the right is the list of composers. So each different group has a specific page where they publish their content. So I'm going to go to Beethoven. Right. On the site, there are 2 components to this in terms of grading, which I have found completely eliminate the type of group project issues you can have with students. Half of the points are based on the individual work for each student's individual paragraph, and half of the points are assigned to the group for the group aspects of the project. Assigning those half of the points for the individual work really engages everyone in the group project, because they know if they don't engage entirely, half of those points are just on them. They aren't on the rest of the group. So it doesn't allow anybody to sit back and just let the group do the work, because everyone's responsible for their own paragraph. Likewise, as far as the group is concerned, the group is not responsible if someone doesn't do their own paragraph on the project. The group is not responsible for that particular paragraph. That paragraph just isn't on their site then. So the group doesn't have to pick that up if they don't participate. What you're looking at is an image of the composer, and I also provided a handout with some of the funnier images of the composers. One of the things I would suggest is that fun is not a 4-letter word. And what I allow these students to do is I encourage them, they need to be factually correct, but they also are allowed to have fun with this. So if you have that handout, it's the one that looks like this. This is the one that shows you some of the images from the site where they found an image of the composer, which is one of the requirements for their page, but then had a little bit of fun with it and did something extra as well. So that gives them a chance to do that. So here's their image. They went serious instead. One of the other things I mentioned is when I did this at first, I did it as discussion postings, which didn't work. The limit for them was infinitesimally small. They just did a sentence or 2 for their discussion postings. There's a 250-word limit for what they need to post for their paragraph. The students regularly, and you can see it here, regularly go way beyond that limit. This is frankly the easiest assignment I give out all semester. The students are so motivated to do this. It runs during the last 5 weeks of the semester, and I will have groups that have their page up in a day. Literally a day. It's the easiest assignment I give out. They feel like this is something that's theirs. It's a place they feel comfortable. They feel it's their technology, their way of communicating, and they do an absolutely fabulous job. The quality has just gone up tremendously from the discussion postings. And the other advantage of that is I can assess this, because now instead of looking at 350 different discussion postings, I have them looking at between, depending on the size of the class, 10 and 14 composer pages, which I can expect them to look through. And actually, I don't even have to expect them to look through. They do go through each other's pages. So here's just one example of, that was the first paragraph. Right, here's the second paragraph. And again, you can see just how long these are. And that's not for me. These are way beyond the word limit. And it's because they get so involved in doing the research and finding out about these composers. Right? So here's all the paragraphs. there's another one. And then they also need to provide videos. So the students can go ahead and provide videos that they choose for their fellow students to listen to. They picked two here. They picked this first one, which is basically just playing this piano sonata, so it's a very nice example of a Beethoven sonata. But the second one they picked is particularly interesting, and I might run a little bit of this. The reason that's interesting is one of the other things I do in the class with the students is I have them create what are called listening maps. And the reason for listening maps is because we're all used to hearing music as background around us all the time. So what happens is none of us listen to music very closely. For example, back in the classical period, people would study up on music before they go to a concert, so they listened very carefully to what they should expect to hear. And they were very critical of whether they heard exactly what they should hear or not. Now we tend to be so used to hearing music that it sort of washes through instead. So what the students are expected to do is listen to excerpts of music and then draw what they hear. And that doesn't mean drawing a picture of how it makes you feel. It means drawing a diagram of actually, well, how many layers there are. Are there things that are sounding vertically at the same time? Are there notes that happen one after the other? How many different instruments or voices are in there? So the reason I like this particular example is because they picked a diagram of this Beethoven symphony that also looks like a listening map. Now, I don't expect the students to do anything this detailed. This listening map, and I'll play just a little bit of it for you, actually covers every note in the symphony. I don't expect them to go at that detail. But I thought it was particularly nice that they picked something for their fellow students to look at that actually mimicked another thing we were doing in the course. So here's just a couple of minutes of that, or not even that, but we'll just watch a little. There we go. Okay, so you get an idea of that, and the students that way are looking at this, and it reinforces not just giving them a chance to hear the particular music, but also the fact that this is very similar to what I asked them to do in the class. Down here you can see the references. They need to provide references for each of their paragraphs, so they need to let me know where they found all this information. And then down below that are comments. And what the students need to do is they need to stay in character, so they need to maintain the fact that they're Beethoven or they're Mozart or they're Stravinsky, and they need to send comments back and forth. And the interesting thing is I tell them you can have fun with that. You can make it feel like a Facebook comment, but it also has to be factually accurate. And one of the things I found so interesting is they have dug into the particular aspects of these composers' lives enough to think about what would I say if I was Stravinsky and I was writing a post to Bach, or what would I say to Mozart if I happened to be Beethoven. And the comments are really perceptive, and in fact, in some ways, I'm almost happier with the comments than with the paragraphs themselves. Because seriously, they have to really think about, okay, I'm Stravinsky, I'm in the 20th century. What would I say to Bach? You know, and then be able to think about, why would I say that? Would his music have affected me? Would I be reacting against his music? And I've been really pleased with the fact that they actually think through that and put comments that actually reflect what might have been the case based on what they're learning about music history.
Are they ever critical, or are they all the appreciative?
No, actually, like for example, there was one. The reason I made the Stravinsky Bach example is because Stravinsky basically told Bach that his music was boring.
Okay.
Because Stravinsky was one that broke a lot of the rules, and Bach broke the rules, but you don't realize it if you think about Baroque music compared to the 20th century. Compared to the 20th century, Baroque music followed all the rules. If you look at Bach during Bach's time, he didn't. He pushed the envelope. But if you look at it compared to how Stravinsky changed things, then Bach is going to look more conservative. So yeah, so they sometimes they'll say that, like for example, they'll be Stravinsky's a good one because I saw some comments where students get credited back for pushing the elements at first, but then there's others that'll say, why did you write so carefully? Why are you?
I hope you use the line, thought you photo rules.
Oh, sometimes they will. Like I said, you've got those examples where they will. Yeah, I allow them to put humor into it as long as they are factually accurate. So that's an example of the site. The other handouts that I've given you, there's one set of handouts that says Welcome to Social Tactus on it. That's the actual directions for the students that are literally in the Canvas course on Learn at UW. So that's the set of directions. And then the other thing I have provided is the Social Tactus WordPress site directions. Those are the directions. Great diagrams for the students. They're wonderful directions. The students follow them and have absolutely no problem. So please feel free to reference those instead of having to start from scratch. You can use these that have been tried and tested and work really well for students. So any questions or comments at this time? Anybody?
So, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I have questions/comments. I was very interested in this talk because in my teaching statement, I mentioned something like I want my students in engineering, I want to refer them to professors, or not professors, I mean figures from different backgrounds, such that to improve or like to enhance the diversity and the sense of diversity they have. So when I looked at the examples here, it looked like most of the people are white.
Oh yeah, yep, and they're all male.
Yeah,
they're all white and they're all male. Okay,
so,
yes, and in fact, that has come up numerous times before. And here's my issue. All right, the issue is that those are the composers that changed music history.
Right.
There's nothing else I can do about it. There's one female composer that could be in that group. Her name's Clara Schumann, but she didn't change anything. She wrote in the Romantic period, and she didn't move anything. She wrote just the way everything was. Everybody you see up here pushed things forward, right? They were the movers and shakers of that particular time frame. So yes, that is not the first time that's been brought up, and I'm very aware of that. But the problem is that's what I have in music history, you know. And so the thing is, and in fact, the other issue, in fairness to the students, I want them to be doing research for this, and I want them to write something that's really well done and has a lot of different information in it, which is what they're doing. But if I assign somebody that's a female composer, or even an African-American composer, for example, Scott Joplin is one I have toyed with for the 20th century. The problem is there's not enough information about those out there for the students to look at compared to these, you know. So believe me, I'm very aware of of what that looks like. But there's just not another option at this point. Hopefully at some point, someday, depending on how things happen. But even if you think of the 20th century, there just aren't a lot of female composers that have really taken the front and center. Hopefully that'll change, or other nationalities.
Yeah, it's the same problem with those who invented power cycles and motors and engines. And, yeah, it's the same problem.
It would be really interesting, though, to make that as sort of a challenge for students to say, you know, for however many points extra credit, if you can find X number of sources about, you know, to expand the repertoire, please do so. And even if they can't find as many sources, maybe, you know, they get extra points for contributing to sort of the body, not contributing to the body of literature, but body of knowledge for the students in the class, so that you're right, so that they're not the only ones that are being represented.
Yeah, there's such a tremendous difference in the level of information out there.
Yeah.
For those that's just, it's a huge problem. Like I said, Clara Schumann is the first one that comes to mind, and even if you look for her, it's always, she's related to Robert Schumann, who is a composer. She's married to him, all right, and was also, this is Brahms over here. They were also friends with Brahms, but Robert Schumann isn't up there because Robert Schumann wrote in the time period as well. So Brahms is there because he pushed the envelope. So it's just what it is. There's just not any way I can deal with that and cover the concepts and make sure there's enough information out there for them to look at. So,
And I always warn them about that. You know, we always talk about that when I hand out the composer assignments. You know, I always make sure they're aware to look at, and they know that. You know, one of the things I was talking about when there was some classical music playing in here before I started, and one of the things we talked about is that back when I started teaching, that was considered my music, and the students would listen to popular music, and they thought I was forcing them to listen to what I thought was my music. And that's not the case anymore. The students out there listen to a tremendous variety of things. So even though we have to look at these because these are the ones that really built music history, they're aware of all sorts of artists and performers from all different groups. So, and I try to send them to links and things like that during the semester that also cover that as well. So we do that outside of here, but in here, because it's the basics of music history, this is what we have.
So what does your assignment look like, or what are you thinking about for your assignment?
Well, it wasn't really an assignment. I was thinking of just bringing up examples in the course, throughout the course, of prominent figures in the history and the contemporary practice of engineering in some course or something. Yeah, but most of the people who have like printed their names in the history of things that I care about in the course mostly are like look exactly like
Yes.
even with the wigs too. The other
Yes. They even have the wigs too. Yeah. So, and as you've been talking, I'm trying to think of. I mean, the only other thing I think you could potentially do is like invent a new person. Potentially, I mean, there's another creative way to look at it. One of the things that, because the nice thing about this assignment is it can translate to so many different topics, you know, even though it's because a lot of the assignments I do have to be in a music class, you know, so, but this is one that can actually transfer to different, so I have colleagues in English, for example, who've talked about having different characters in stories talk to each other, so that way you get around that issue of having like just all white writers or all male writers or that kind of thing, which is a little easier in writing, but still that's a way to open that up, is to actually have the characters talk to each other via something like this instead of the writers themselves. So,
Or open up a parallel assignment, like once you've done this, now let's take a look at contemporary artists, because there's a lot more information about contemporary artists out there. That would be sort of an interesting thing, just sort of to see, I mean, as an instructor, to see what they choose, who they choose to.
yeah, see that's, well, and that's actually, that would be interesting, but that would be very, tremendously broad. The reason I say that is because my compromise.
A lot more work for you.
Yes, well, my compromise, well, and it would be really full, because this class has 70 in it, and there'd probably be 70 choices, literally. And I'm not exaggerating, because frankly, what I used to do when I started teaching as a compromise, because they thought it was my music all semester, right, is at the end of the semester, I would ask the students to give me their top 3, and it was always top 40 at that time, okay, this is like 25 years ago. So it was always, they'd give me my top 3 songs or artists of the time. Like, for example, one semester, Michael Jackson's Thriller, everybody had that in their top 3. So that's the piece we looked at, right? So that's what I used to do every semester to do a compromise. I literally had to stop doing that about maybe now 5 years ago, I think, because I literally didn't get anything in common between all the students.
Consensus.
Nobody. There would be no overlap. Not even like one person had the name of one other person. So it's, which is, I think, wonderful. I think that's amazing that they're exposed to so many different artists and performers and things. That's fantastic. But it means to try and do something like that, I mean, it would be really neat, but boy, that would be a big site, because there'd be, you know, everybody'd have their own person on there. So, yeah.
Another thing that you can do, and I do this in, so I teach psychology classes, and so when we're talking about, because again, it's the same thing, you know, so what I try to do is I try and invite them to talk about what's happening in the broader context of history at that time, right? Mm-hmm. Which contributes to why these theorists got funding to do the work that they did to become as popular as they were. You know, so what's happening in history is also kind of another way to bring in sort of a system challenge students to think like in a systems way. Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, so see, with ours, it's the opposite. With ours, these are the people who most of the time weren't getting the money. These are the people who were changing things, and so they weren't popular during their own time. You know, most of the people you see, in fact, part of the reason that students like Stravinsky a lot, he's the one over here, is because when he performed one of his pieces, it literally caused a riot because there was such a reaction against the music. In fact, that's a point I want to make. One of the very interesting side effects of this, especially talking from a psychology standpoint, is I've had numerous students tell me that this has made them feel better about themselves, which was a side effect I didn't expect. And what they've told me is they've said, look, you know, we picture Mozart and Beethoven and Bach as these amazing composers that everybody knows. And to find out, first of all, the struggles they had in their lives, and then to find out, too, that they were ignored or ridiculed in their own time by people who were listening to their music. They've said it really makes them feel better about their own struggles and the fact that they can work through them. You know, like if Bach can work through what he had to live through, and if Mozart can do that, maybe I can too. And that's been sort of a neat sideline to this whole project, is they take these composers and see their real lives and realize that these people that they thought were tremendously successful either had to work for it just as hard as they do, or weren't as successful as they thought they were in their own time. And so it's been really a positive motivator for a lot of them. So it's been a nice effect.
I have a question about the evaluation. So how would you evaluate their pieces online? Would you let their peers to contribute?
Well, actually, their peers have to contribute in the comments. They need to comment on each other's pages. I do two things to evaluate it. One is it's 50 points total for the project. So 25% of the points are for the paragraph, individual paragraph, and then for your individual postings. And so those basically, I want them to, first of all, you have to do it first person, you have to be creative, you have to show your sources, you have to address the topic given in your paragraph. You know, so like for example, if you're asked to talk about socioeconomic issues at the time, you need to address that in your paragraph. And then the other 25 points are for including the site and then the overall site, because they're all responsible for each other's work. So they're all supposed to proofread, they're all supposed to look at that. So the other way, though, I do assess it is there's an essay question on the exam, and they are expected to incorporate some of the content that they learned from that site in the exam, and they have to label those as such. So, yeah, that's a real improvement over, like I said, I started this as a discussion posting assignment, which I couldn't assess. There was no fair way to assess 350 discussion postings. So this works much better because this is only 10 to 14 pages, and they are in there regularly. So it's a very fair way for me to expect them to have looked at that content.
What about the responding to the comments? Will that be considered as part of the evaluation?
That's part of that as well too. Yep. And you could go even further. I remember, for me, this is just one small component out of a 750 point class. So, but I could also see definitely going even farther with the peer review. I could see that working really well for this particular project.
Jamie, do you start over every semester to sort of wipe the site clean?
Yes.
Do they get any sort of modeling or example of what it might look like to sort of get them started, or are they figuring it all out from scratch each week, each year?
To be honest, it doesn't. I don't think they need to figure anything out. They feel like this is so much their realm that because like literally, in fact, I said at the beginning, this is a 5-week project. It happens during the last 5 weeks of the semester, and literally people have their pages up that day. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. It's just, it's so amazing. You know, usually you've got students getting their assignments in right at the deadline. You know, like if it's supposed to be 12 p.m., they'll have all these things coming in at 11:59 or 12:01. This will be done days ahead of time. Everybody. I mean, I never expected that, and it's the easiest assignment I hand out all semester.
Do you think it's because that it is online, or do you think it is because they actually love to impersonate these people?
I think it's a combination. I think part of it is they really feel like I said, I got the idea from looking at my daughter on her Facebook page. So I think this is something they feel really at home with, this is something they really identify with themselves as opposed to some of the other kinds of assignments we might give them, which feel more academic to them. So that's part of it, but I think also part of it is they do have fun being someone else. And I do always make sure I tell them that, you know, you're not supposed to impersonate dead people on the internet, and I think that's a motivating factor for some of the students is they enjoy that feeling of doing something that's a little bit not what they're supposed to do. So it's a combination of both. It's a combination of both. But yeah, I've been doing this for quite a while, and I'm still amazed at how much energy they'll put into it without hardly any, it's just a tap from me to say, here's the assignment, and they go, you know, so it's
a great way
really
to
nice.
connect sort of the history of things with what their world looks like right now, and say, what would they look, you know, to sort of reimagine what would history have looked like if it were done via social media.
Well, and the thing is too, the other advantage of it, talking about connections, is it also gives them that chance to connect a little bit to some of the things they may know about, you know, because remember, I teach non-majors, so the students that come into my class are coming from all different experiences and majors all over campus. So some of them may be history majors, or some of them may be English literature majors, or, you know, so they may have a different perspective on how these people and how they were connected back in their time that they can then bring in, you know, so it gives them that chance.
The context thing would be really cool. And then to help the non-majors connect with music as part of their life, to, you know, what is my connection as an engineer with classical music? Yeah. Have any of you seen other social media type assignments that you thought were interesting or problematic, or? I had tried using Facebook in a class that I taught several years ago. And what I had initially done was I asked the students, how many of you have Facebook accounts? And about 40% of them said that they did, which was a total lie, because they all did. But they didn't want that to mix with the academic side.
And actually, I've always been told we have to be careful of that, just because, like, in fact, I don't know if you noticed, but on this site, this course got put through Quality Matters this spring, and they needed to be able to see everything, but you can see on here, see where it says name redacted down here? All right, so the students have to all sign their own individual paragraphs, okay? But all those names are off of there, so there's also a whole privacy issue with the students, so that's why this isn't even a public site, this is just a WordPress site just for the class.
Right.
So,
And I think that's a really great way to get around it, because
yes.
we can't, as instructors, say, oh yeah, I want you to open up a Facebook account, and so go ahead and sign that, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, you
Yes, and all the rest of that. Yep.
Give up all of your information and be tracked and that sort of stuff. So having your own site is a good way to sort of get the feeling of that. They know that it's not their space.
Yes,
but
you're not expected to do it in your own space.
Yeah.
Actually, I was one of your students back then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because no, I mean the feeling is the same. Because I once took a class and the instructor let us use a software called WeChat. It's kind of like Twitter.
Yes.
Yeah. So we use that personally in our spare time, but in class the instructor asked us to add that special group into our WeChat, and we will share files or PowerPoint slides in that group. And then I was actually one of the students who did not like it so much, because I think the phone, my cell phone or my WeChat is a personal tool, or the same thing like my Facebook. So I don't want to like work on my Facebook in the class. So I think a private site is better. Yeah.
And I did use Twitter once, and the thought was create an account in Twitter. This was early on, and I had people tweet each week about something relating to the campus or where they're at with the course content. And, I was able to follow that, track that, And it was successful, but the nice thing was Twitter doesn't require you to use your real name, or it didn't at the time, so you could create a totally fake account, and that was fine. As long as I knew who you were, we were good.
Yeah.
So it was sort of closed in that way.
Yeah. I actually heard recently about a really, I thought, neat idea for Twitter. It's a class about birds. And so one of the assignments that ran the whole semester was tweet like the birds. And you had to make Twitter postings just as you were walking around on campus or as you were out and about of the birds you saw and observing their behavior. So and actually the students really liked that assignment. So I think it just depends on the assignment too. So, but yeah, I think at least from the information I've been given, I've been told it has to be on something that's private for campus because of the student privacy issues. So
there was an app that still exists. It's a mobile app called Sifter, and it's a place-based photo location app. So you can take a picture, and it knows where you are. So one of the assignments was, and this was a class to sort of for student success, a freshman experience class, so that you can get familiar with campus, feel like you belong. So I'd have the students go out and take pictures of the different parts of campus that they are in, what was special about them, sort of any like hints or like a cool place to eat that maybe they just discovered that they should share with the rest of the class. And that was very successful because the students would look at that app, they would say, oh, here's this cool thing. Did you know that you can get into the greenhouses here? Or on the top floor of Van Nuys, you can go up there, or these other places that we don't know about necessarily until they're pointed out to us inside the tunnels, things like that. So that was kind of fun. But that was also sort of a socially sort of thing, student-curated, student-generated content that they thought was important, I guess.
Another way might be let all the students share one account on one social media. So one of my colleagues, what she did is to create a group account on Weibo, sort of like Chinese Facebook, and then let all the students share this account. They log in and then they can post whatever they want with the language they're learning, and nobody knows who posted. And that's why most of the students feel comfortable using that account instead of their own one. Yeah.
You guys remember Hickey for campus? That was an anonymous student-generated posts on campus that you could, and it was focused on campus so people could sort of anonymously air their griefs. And for a while it had quite it would make an interesting sort of impact because people could grouse about, just got out of whatever class and my professor's terrible, and be totally anonymous so that they could sort of say it and be done with it. I'd always wanted to figure out how to use that for an assignment, but I ended up steering away. Partly because of that, it's not my platform. This is a platform for a different area, for a different purpose, not for.
Well, and as you say that, the other thing it made me realize is pointing out that those names were redacted for the Quality Matters, and also then it worked out well for this too, is that those names aren't redacted when the students do this the first time. And so I think on the one hand, there's a nice feel to being anonymous because then you might have more freedom of information, but I think it also may have a little bit of an impact on the quality of what they're doing in that all the other students are going to go in there and they know that, So I think you have to weigh that when you're thinking about your particular project.
Yeah.
But that may also be a little bit why the assignments are the way they are.
And that's a really good point. I think that any of these peer formats assignments where the students can see what each other does, they're not just trying to impress you, they're also trying to impress their classmates. It's a social capital thing in some ways. And so I see what Fang does and I'm like, I want to do a little bit better than that, and improve on that a little bit, and that raises the bar for the next person to do. So I think we push each other up sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I would say is there's a huge difference between reporting the music history if you would do it in third person and reporting it with the role playing. You know, the quality of this is so much higher because they're assuming that role. And I just find that fascinating that, you know, the history is still there. The same things they report are still there. But because of how they are able to assimilate that feeling of being that composer, the energy they put into it is so much greater than if they were just making a history report. You know, so, yeah, yeah, just adding that little component, you know, is amazing how much of a difference that made in the quality of what I would get back from the students. So,
do you find, sort of along the lines of pushing each other up, that especially when students are commenting on each other's posts, that they're commenting in a way that, you know, shows they're witty or whatever, versus they're actually trying to find some sort of information that the other students missed and like weave that in? So are they building up the body of knowledge that you're going for, or are they getting?
It combines. It depends. I mean, it depends. It matters depending on the students. Some students will use it based on what they know about their own composer, depending on whose pages they're posting on. Others will add things that, you know, they'll even say, did you know that I ran into you at such and such place, or, you know, and you actually liked the performance I did on your piece, or, you know, that kind of thing. And so it's a combination of both, because I leave the comments are pretty much wide open. The only rule for those is I say you still have to be the composer. And then the other thing I say is you have to be the composer thinking about how would you react to that composer from your place. You know, so you have to keep that in mind. You know, you can't just write something that Stravinsky would say and not keep in mind that you're a 20th century composer writing about Beethoven. You know, so those are the two criteria. So I get a combination of both.
So if Stravinsky talks to Beethoven and says, I really like the X piece, do the students in the Beethoven group go, oh my gosh, we better learn about the X piece because we didn't know about that necessarily?
Sometimes, it depends. Yeah, sometimes you'll just get the comments, and sometimes you'll get a chain where they'll react to each other. So it sort of works the same way as regular Facebook.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Yes. You know,
Sometimes
sometimes you'll get a flurry of comments, or you'll get somebody who'll check something out, and then other times they'll just post and it'll stay. So that works sort of the same way.
In your WordPress, is that just regular stock WordPress, or is there a social media plugin that can have the likes and the plus ones or the other?
I think it's just a regular one, yeah. Because again, we didn't want to make it too specific, because that's one of the things John and I were talking about beforehand. Is if you do something like this, there's not often a lot of money to keep updating. Yeah. So the safest thing is to make it as generic as you possibly can. And so this one doesn't have the up or down kind of thing and that kind of thing in it.
Yeah, a lot of those plugins, I mean, many of them are free. Sometimes they break, sometimes they continue on, you know. Sometimes there's costs associated with them, so sort of, I don't know. I guess the other way to do that is to say, hey students, any of you tech savvy want to create this with us? You know, and have them actually create the site. In some cases that might work, in others it won't.
Yeah. Other questions?
Awesome. All right. So with these handouts, can we go in and look at this site? Is that?
No, those are actually from my Canvas course site.
Okay.
So just so that if you were interested in doing these, you wouldn't have to start from scratch. These are already tried and true instructions for walking them through how to use the WordPress site. So I figured that would be handy for people if you wanted to use this particular project, that you could just go ahead and use those. So.
And then the memes.
Yeah, what are these?
Those are different. I actually took pictures of those. Those are up in my office because they are over the years the different students have put in their particular, you know, like, because you need to have that image of your composer. And so some of them pick, like, I don't know if these guys picked anything interesting or if they all did the standard ones. I think most everyone in this particular site picked the standard ones. But over the years I collected the ones that were particularly interesting in terms of that, so that's where those come from. So that's just a series of the different images that students have put in. So
I think composer memes would be a great assignment.
there you go. Yeah, sure.
The meme generator and
So yeah, I don't think everyone was pretty careful on this one this time. We have all the standard ones. So it's also really fun for me to grade because they will find things sometimes, because as a music major, you never learn about it this way. You always learn about it from the music. You don't get a chance to actually dig into the lives of the composers. Maybe you do a little if you become a music history major, but if you do any of the other majors, it's always, you know who the composers are, but it's always right to the music. So it's actually fun for me because I go in and they'll find out things I didn't know. They'll dig around for stuff that. So it's a really fun assignment for me to look through too.
And then do you compile that throughout the years, over the years, and have this amazing glossary of?
I have all of them. Yeah, in part because you have to keep records for at least the semester after they've completed everything. So I have all of those. Yeah.
For how long have you been doing this?
I don't remember how long now. It's been a while because it went through Ning.com was the first one. That was the original site we used for this because they had an educator's version and then a commercial version. But then they went commercial with everything and they were going to start charging us, I think it was like $200 a course, a semester, which for one project, that was horrendously expensive because I teach 3 sections in the fall and 2 in the spring. So that would be a lot of money just to run this one project. So that's when we switched it to WordPress.
I feel it was 2010 or 11.
Something like that, yeah. So it's been a while. Yeah.
But yeah, I was saying one of the things that's kind of fun about this is this is a really good example, in my view, of a good idea that can move from platform to platform as the platforms come and go. So we started off with Ning, it was free, and then they got charged. Took a little bit of work on your part and others to move it over to WordPress, but...
And now it's been pretty stable on WordPress for quite a while. We haven't had to do any, now that I say that, now something will happen. But it's been quite a while where we haven't had to, in fact, even these instructions haven't changed. So that's been really nice.
But if it does go away, we've got Google Sites on campus, so it wouldn't take much at all to move over to that. Then who knows what's next, Weebly or But yeah, the basic idea just keeps on moving. If there are no other questions, please let me thank Jamie for coming today and sharing her story. And do please fill out our evaluation. We use it to show that we're doing important stuff and we make changes.